Hello, it's Fred Weems. I'm going to read the second part of a three-part video installment. In the first part, I read Herman Melville's The Paradise of Bachelors, which he wrote as a two-part story called The Paradise of Bachelors and The Tartarus of Maids. The Tartarus of Maids is too long for one video, so after various attempts at uploading it, I've decided to cut the Tartarus of Maids into two. So here is the first part of the Tartarus of Maids. The Paradise of Bachelors had the narrator visiting London to go to the Temple Bar, where he met a bunch of lawyers who had a banquet. They had alcohol, they had snuff, they had a convivial and civilized gathering. Suddenly, the Tartarus of Maids has us back in the United States. The Tartarus of Maids. It lies not far from Wodelore Mountain in New England. Turning to the east, right out from among bright farms and sunny meadows, nodding in early June with odorous grasses, you enter ascendingly among bleak hills. These gradually close in upon a dusky pass, which from the violent Gulf Stream of air, unceasingly driving between its cloven walls of haggard rock, as well as from the tradition of a crazy spinster's hut having long ago stood somewhere hereabouts, is called the Mad Maid's Bellows Pipe. Winding along at the bottom of the gorge is a dangerously narrow wheel road, occupying the bed of a former torrent. Following this road to its highest point, you stand as within a Dantean gateway. From the steepness of the walls here, their strangely ebon hue, and the sudden contraction of the gorge, this particular point is called the Black Notch. The ravine now expandingly descends into a great purple hopper-shaped hollow, far sunk among many Plutonian shaggy-wooded mountains. By the country people, this hollow is called the Devil's Dungeon. Sounds of torrents fall on all sides upon the ear. These rapid waters unite at last in one turbid, brick-colored stream, boiling through a flume among enormous boulders. They call this strange-colored torrent Blood River. Gaining a dark precipice, it wheels suddenly to the west and makes one maniac spring of 60 feet into the arms of a stunted wood of gray-haired pines, between which it thence eddies on its further way down to the invisible lowlands. Conspicuously crowning a rocky bluff to one side, at the cataract's verge, is the ruin of an old sawmill, built in those primitive times when vast pines and hemlocks superabounded throughout the neighboring region. The black-mossed bulk of those immense, rough-hewn, and spike-knotted logs, here and there tumbled altogether, in long abandonment and decay, or left in solitary, perilous projection over the cataract's gloomy brink, impart to this rude wooden ruin not only much of the aspect of one of rough quarried stone, but also a sort of feudal Rhineland and Thurnberg look, derived from the pinnacled wildness of the neighboring scenery. Not far from the bottom of the dungeon stands a large whitewashed building, relieved, like some great white sepulchre, against the sullen background of mountainside firs and other hardy evergreens, inaccessibly rising in grim terraces for some 2,000 feet. The building is a paper mill. Having embarked on a large scale in the seedsman's business, so extensively and broadcast indeed, that at length my seeds were distributed through all the eastern and northern states, and even fell into the far soil of Missouri and the Carolinas, the demand for paper at my place became so great that the expenditure soon amounted to a most important item in the general account. It need hardly be hinted how paper comes into use with seedsmen as envelopes. These are mostly made of yellowish paper, folded square, and when filled are all but flat, and being stamped and superscribed with the nature of the seeds contained, assume not a little the appearance of business letters ready for the mail. Of these small envelopes I used an incredible quantity, several hundreds of thousands in a year. For a time I had purchased my paper from the wholesale dealers in a neighboring town. For economy's sake, and partly for the adventure of the trip, I now resolved to cross the mountains, some 60 miles, and order my future paper at the Devil's Dungeon paper mill. The sleighing being uncommonly fine toward the end of January, and promising to hold so for no small period, in spite of the bitter cold, I started one gray Friday noon in my pung, well fitted with buffalo and wolf robes, and spending one night on the road, next noon came in sight of Wodelore Mountain. The far summit fairly smoked with frost. White vapors curled up from its white wooded top as from a chimney. The intense congelation made the whole country look like one petrifaction. The steel shoes of my pung crunched and gritted over the vitreous chippy snow, as if it had been broken glass. The forests here and there, skirting the route, feeling the same all-stiffening influence, their inmost fibers penetrated with the cold, strangely groaned, not in the swaying branches merely, but likewise in the vertical trunk, as the fitful gusts remorselessly swept through them. Brittle with excessive frost, many colossal, tough-grained maples, snapped in twain like pipe stems, cumbered the unfeeling earth. Flaked all over with frozen sweat, white as a milky ram, his nostrils at each breath sending forth two horn-shaped shoots of heated respiration, Black, my good horse, but 6 years old, started at a sudden turn, where, right across the track, not 10 minutes fallen, an old distorted hemlock lay, darkly undulatory as an Black, my good horse, but 6 years old, started at a sudden turn, where, right across the track, not 10 minutes fallen, an old distorted hemlock lay, darkly undulatory as an anaconda. Gaining the bellows pipe, the violent blast, dead from behind, all but shoved my high-backed pung uphill. The gust shrieked through the shivered pass, as if laden with lost spirits bound to the unhappy world. Ere gaining the summit, Black, my horse, as if exasperated by the cutting wind, slung out with his strong hind legs, tore the light pung straight uphill, and sweeping grazingly through the narrow notch, sped downward madly past the ruined sawmill. Into the devil's dungeon horse and cataract rushed together. With might and main, quitting my seat and robes, and standing backward with one foot braced against the dashboard, I rasped and churned the bit, and stopped him just in time to avoid collision at a turn with the bleak nozzle of a rock, couchant like a lion in the way, a roadside rock. At first I could not discover the paper mill. The whole hollow gleamed with the white, except here and there, where a pinnacle of granite showed one windswept angle bare. The mountains stood pinned in shrouds, a pass of alpine corpses. Where stands the mill? Suddenly a whirling, humming sound broke upon my ear. I looked, and there, like an arrested avalanche, lay the large whitewashed factory. It was subordinately surrounded by a cluster of other and smaller buildings, some of which, from their cheap blank air, great length, gregarious windows, and comfortless expression, no doubt were boarding houses of the operatives, a snow-white hamlet amidst the snows. Various rude, irregular squares and courts resulted from the somewhat picturesque clusterings of these buildings, owing to the broken, rocky nature of the ground, which forbade all method in their relative arrangement. Several narrow lanes and alleys, too, partly blocked with snowfall and from the roof, cut up the hamlet in all directions. When, turning from the traveled highway, jingling with bells of numerous farmers, who, availing themselves of the fine sleighing, were dragging their wood to market, and frequently diversified with swift cutters, dashing from inn to inn of the scattered villages, when, I say, turning from that bustling main road, I by degrees wound into the mad maid's bellows pipe, and saw the grim black notch beyond, then something latent as well as something obvious in the time and scene strangely brought back to my mind my first sight of dark and grimy Temple Bar. And when Black, my horse, went darting through the notch, perilously grazing its rocky wall, I remembered being in a runaway London omnibus, which in much the same sort of style, though by no means at an equal rate, dashed through the ancient arch of Rennes. Though the two objects did by no means completely correspond, yet this partial inadequacy but served to tinge the similitude. Though the two objects did by no means completely correspond, yet this partial inadequacy but served to tinge the similitude, not less with the vividness than the disorder of a dream. So that, when upon reining up at the protruding rock, I at last caught sight of the quaint groupings of the factory buildings, and with the traveled highway and the notch behind, found myself all alone, silently and privily stealing through deep cloven passages into this sequestered spot, and saw the long, high-gabled main factory edifice with a rude tower for hoisting heavy boxes at one end, standing among its crowded outbuildings and boarding houses, as the temple church amidst the surrounding offices and dormitories, and when the marvelous retirement of this mysterious mountain nook fastened its whole spell upon me, then what memory lacked, all tributary imagination furnished, and I said to myself, this is the very counterpart of the paradise of bachelors, but snowed upon, and frost-painted to a sepulchre. Dismounting and warily picking my way down the dangerous declivity, horse and man both sliding now and then upon the icy ledges, at length I drove, or the blast drove me, into the largest square, before one side of the main edifice. Piercingly and shrilly the shotted blast blew by the corner, and redly and demoniacally boiled Blood River at one side. A long woodpile of many scores of cords, all glittering in mail of crusted ice, stood crosswise in the square. A row of horse posts, their north sides plastered with adhesive snow, flanked the factory wall. The bleak frost packed and paved the square as with some ringing metal. The inverted similitude recurred. The sweet tranquil temple garden, with the Thames bordering its green beds, strangely meditated I. But where are the gay bachelors? Then, as I and my horse stood shivering in the wind spray, a girl ran from a neighboring dormitory door, and throwing off her thin apron over her bare head, made for the opposite building. "One moment, my girl. Is there no shed hereabouts which I may drive into?" Pausing, she turned upon me a face pale with work and blue with cold, and eyes supernatural with unrelated misery. Okay, I'm going to cut that off right there, and we'll resume in part 3. Thank you.